Chapter 3. Education and Coloring of the KYIV State. 10. Slavs in the VIIX centuries. Slavs in the VI, 7 centuries. The ancestors of the Slavs, one of the largest peoples of Europe, have long occupied a large part of Eastern Europe. According to the stories of Roman writers, 2 centuries. N.E., who knew the Slavs under the name of the Wends, the Slavs lived along the Vistula River and on the southern shore of the Baltic Sea. Byzantine writers of the VI, they distinguished the Western Slavs from the Eastern Slavs, whom they called Antes. Eastern Slavs at that time lived along the Dniester and Dnieper rivers to the Black Sea coast and further to the east. They engaged in agriculture, cattle breeding, fishing and hunting. They knew the treatment of metals. They lived in huts, woven from brushwood or cane and smeared with clay. The settlements were surrounded by moats, earthen ramparts and fences. At that time the Eastern Slavs were still living in a clan system. Cases were decided at a tribal meeting. Such a collection was called vesh, from the word broadcast, to speak. Elders, or princes, stood out from the community. Some of them had influence not only in their own, but also in neighboring tribes. Slavic tribes already at this time were united in large tribal unions, from which the first old Russian states later grew up. The Eastern Slavs had patriarchal slavery, but slave labor did not play a significant role in their economy. The captives were either sold to foreign merchants, or released to their homeland for ransom, or after a few years of captivity granted them freedom and the right to live in the community as free people. The Slavs raided the territory of the Byzantine Empire. The main purpose of these raids was to capture prey and captives, which then went on sale. From year to year the Slavs ravaged the Danube lands that were part of the Byzantine Empire. Cheerful and strong, very hardy, the Slavs easily tolerated heat, cold and hunger. In the war, they showed a lot of dexterity and cunning. Armed only with shields and darts, they boldly rushed at the enemies. Fleeing from the enemy, the Slavs plunged headlong into the water and breathed through the reeds that were kept in their mouths. During the wars with Byzantium, the Slavs became acquainted with the military technique of the Byzantines and learned to own the Byzantines' weapons better than themselves. In the VI, Slavs did not limit themselves to raids on the border areas of the Byzantine Empire, but began to settle on the conquered lands. They settled the entire northern part of the Balkan Peninsula almost to Constantinople and penetrated even into the interior of the empire. In the 7th century, a nomadic horde of Bulgarians invaded the valley of the Danube. Culturally, Danube agricultural Slavs were much higher than the herdsman Bulgarians. Therefore, the Bulgarians, who settled in the Danube land, quickly became enamored. The descendants of the Bulgarian princes led the Slavic state, formed in the late 7th century, south of the Danube and received the name Bulgaria or the Danube Bulgaria, in contrast to Bulgaria's Kamskaya. Slavic tribes in the 8ix centuries. In the 8ix centuries, Eastern Slavs were divided into several tribes. Slavic tribes, once inhabiting the Black Sea steppes and on the shores of the Black Sea, were mostly swept away by the flow of nomads. On the Middle Dnieper, in the Kiev region, on the border with the steppe, lived a glade, from the word field, i.e., the steppe. To the west of the glades, in the western regions of present-day Ukraine, Dubs or Volhynians lived, and to the northwest, to the tributary of the Dnieper Pripyat, the Drevlian, forest dwellers. To the north of the Pripyat to the western Dvina there were settlements of inhabitants of the marshes, Drigoviches, muddle swamp. On the left bank of the Dnieper, on the tributary of Hizhdana, was the residence of the northerners. A vast area along the upper reaches of the Dnieper, starting from the Smolensk area, and along the western Dvina, was occupied by Krivichi. A separate tribe comprised the Radimiks who lived along the Saj River, the tributary of the Dnieper. Slavs who lived along the shores of Lake Ilmen are known under the name of the Slavs of the Ilmen, or Novgorod, Novgorodians. To the east of the Dnieper Basin, along the Oka River and its tributary to the Moskva River, Vutachi lived. Classes and social system of the Eastern Slavs. At the time described, the Eastern Slavs were predominantly an agricultural people. In forest areas, agriculture was still a slash. When the cutting was cut, the woods were cut, and the bark was ripped off the big trees to dry them. A year later the whole plot prepared for plowing was burned out and loosened up by hoes or plowed. Along with agriculture, a large place in the economy was occupied by forestry, hunting, beekeeping, that is, honey gathering of wild bees, and fishing. In southern areas, agriculture was more important than in the north. By the 9th century, the tribal system in the Eastern Slavs markedly decomposed, but some of the ancestral vestiges were preserved even before the 11th century. Continue to apply blood feud, although not in such a wide scope as in the generic system. Matrimonial customs characteristic of the patriarchal family were preserved. Some of the more backward tribes continue to steal, that is, kidnap, women. The other wives were bought for veno, that is, for a fee. Who was richer had several wives. But genus in the full sense of the word no longer existed. The births broke up into separate large families. Individual families, connected not by kinship relations, but by common territory, formed a land community, which in the Eastern Slavs was called the rope. The farmers who were part of the community were called smrds. Common property of the forest was forest land and pastures. Each family that entered the community had the right to graze their livestock on common pasture. In the general forest, choose from honeybees. Put out way, i.e. a net for catching animals and birds. Arable plots were fully owned by individual families. The center of the community was a fortified town that served as a refuge for members of the community in case of danger. A group of more prosperous elders, or elders, in whose hands large areas of land are concentrated, are gradually emerging from the community. These lands were handled not only by family members. Some of the prisoners were now enslaved, and they were also forced to work. However, like some other European peoples of the Middle Ages, for example, the Celts, Germans, the Slavs passed the slave-owning formation and went directly from feudalism to feudalism. During wars from among the elders, the leaders, the princes, were elected. Leadership in the war gave the princes new means of enrichment, since in the division of the booty and captives, the lion's share came in favor of the princes. This allowed them to contain at their own expense detachments of soldiers, or squads, for whom war was the main means of existence. With the help of Drusen, the princes seized power in their tribe. At the head of each tribe there were several princes. One of them was considered the main one. The chief prince, on all matters relating to the tribe, was to confer with the other tribal princes and elders. Sometimes a meeting of the whole tribe was convened, a vesh. Such principalities in the IX developed in all Slavic tribes of Eastern Europe. The centers of these principalities were cities that served as residences for the princes and their squads. In the IX century, the following cities are known: near the Glades, Kiev; near the northerners, Chernigov; near Krivichi, Smolensk on the Dnieper, and Polotsk on the western Двина; at the Ilmen Slavs, Novgorod, etc. The Kiev and Novgorod princedoms united surrounding neighboring tribes and formed two small states. Religion of the Eastern Slavs. Slavs before the X century were pagans. They animated nature and endowed it with human properties. Everything that surrounded them, stones, streams, trees, grass, seemed to them full of wonderful powers. They therefore sacrificed to them. They covered the branches of sacred trees with pieces of madder. They threw the offerings into the water. The same miraculous properties, in the opinion of the Slavs, had some animals and birds. The whole world the Slavs inhabited the spirits. The Slavs believed that in every forest there was a lishai, from which luck in hunting depended. Before the start of the hunt, The Slavs left a piece of bread on the stump for the dog. In the river whirlpools, on the representation of the Slavs, lived a water, which, before the beginning of fishing, they tried to appease with sacrifice. In water, except water, lived mermaids. In the hut, every Slav had his own domestic god, a house god, who helped him manage his household. All the phenomena of nature Slavs explained the existence of special supernatural beings, the gods. The main god was the sun, or das god, the son of Svarog, the god of heaven. In honor of the sun, the Slavs held a big holiday in the summer, when the longest days were. The collection of tribute from the subordinate tribes was accompanied by violence and oppression. On this basis, under Igor, there was an uprising of the Drevlians, led by the local Prince Mel. The chronicle tells that Igor gave a collection of tribute from some Slavic tribes to one of the most influential warriors, Sveneldu. This aroused discontent among the other volunteers, who persistently urged Igor to go himself on the Poliadai to the land of the Drevlians, saying, "Sveneldu's servicemen are armed with weapons, dress and horses, and we are naked. Come, Prince, collect tribute, and you will get." And we, collecting tribute from the Drevlian land, Igor dismissed most of his squad, and he decided to repeat the rounds. "I'll come back and look like that." Hearing that the prince goes for a second tribute, the Drevlian began to say, "The wolf has gone to the sheep, the whole herd will be dragged if it is not killed." They killed Igor's squad, and he himself was captured and killed. Igor's widow, Olga, who ruled instead of her young son Sviatoslav, brutally suppressed the insurrection. The main city of the Drevlian, Iskorostan, was taken and burned. The inhabitants were partially killed or enslaved, and some were heavily taxed. But out of fear of new uprisings, Olga for the future time accurately established the size of the tribute. Not content with the tribute, Olga began to seize land that until then was in use by the communities. This indicates the transfer of princes and their vigilantes to more intensive exploitation of the conquered lands. Conquest of Sviatoslav. The son of Igor and Olga, Sviatoslav, continued the conquest wars. The brave leader of the militant squad, Sviatoslav spent his entire life in campaigns, walking lightly like a leopard, did not carry carts with him, slept on the ground in the campaign, placing a saddle under his head, eating half-baked horse meat. He dressed in a simple white shirt, wore an earring in his ear, shaved his head, leaving only a long forelock. Sviatoslav never attacked the enemies treacherously, sneakily. Going on a hike, he sent to say, "I want to go to you. Pridniprovi and Prilimany were already part of the Kiev state." Sviatoslav sent his weapons first to 42 Slavic tribes living to the east of the Dnieper, subdued the Vyatichi on the Oka River, and then went on the offensive against other nations. In the 60th century, he defeated the Volga states, Bulgarian and Khazar, then went to the North Caucasus and broke here Kosogs, Circassians and Yasov, Ossetians. In 967 Sviatoslav made a campaign against the Danube Bulgaria, a country populated by the Slavs, who took the name of the Bulgarians who conquered them. Bulgarians constantly attacked the neighboring Greek Empire and inflicted severe defeats on the Greeks. Therefore, the Greek government, not strong enough to cope with the Bulgarians on its own, called for the help of Sviatoslav. Sviatoslav not only won a complete victory over the Bulgarians, but also intended to consolidate permanently in Pereyaslavets on the Danube, the capital of Bulgaria. "Here," he said, "is in the midst of my land, everything good is converging here. From the Greeks, gold, expensive fabrics, wine and fruit. From the Czech Republic and Hungary, silver, horses. From Russia, furs, wax, honey and slaves." The Greek government, fearing such a formidable neighborhood, bribed the Pechenegs to attack Kiev. The news of the siege of Kiev by the Pechenegs forced Sviatoslav to hurry to the Dnieper. But he did not give up the idea of conquering Bulgaria. After driving the Pechenegs to the steppe, he returned and took Pereyaslavets again. Then the new Byzantine Emperor John Tsimisi came out against him with a large army. Despite the unequal power, Sviatoslav continued the struggle. The chronicle ascribes to him such words addressed to the squad: "We shall not disgrace the Russian land, but we will lay down our bones. We are not ashamed of the dead. I do not have to keep the dead shameless. But if we run, we will be ashamed." It was not difficult for the Greek troops to take Pereyaslavets. The Russian detachment left in the city by Sviatoslav locked himself in the fortified palace of the Bulgarian kings and defended itself even after the city was already in the hands of the enemy. Tsimisides ordered the palace to be set on fire, and only then did the Russians leave the city in the field and give the last battle. "They fought hard," writes the Greek historian, "and they did not flee, but ours were beaten." Sviatoslav locked himself in the city of Darostal on the Danube. From the land, the city was besieged by the troops of Tsimisi, and on the Danube a Greek fleet with fiery weapons blocked the retreat. Nevertheless, Sviatoslav rejected all proposals of the world. His army, very small, defended courageously and made bold outings. At night, the Russians burned the bodies of fallen comrades on the bonfires, killed prisoners in their honor and offered sacrifices to the gods. The besieged were exhausted by hunger. They made the last desperate attempt to break through. The Greek army trembled, and the emperor had to personally go into battle at the head of a detachment of his bodyguards, immortals. The sortie was repulsed. Russians lost many killed, and Sviatoslav himself was wounded. Further resistance was impossible. Sviatoslav in 971 concluded a peace in which he renounced Bulgaria. But the Greek government still feared Sviatoslav and warned the Pechenegs about his return to his homeland. They lurked Sviatoslav at the Dnieper rapids and killed him. From the skull of the murdered Sviatoslav, the Pecheneg prince made a cup. 12. The introduction of Christianity in Kievan Rus. Vladimir Sviatoslavich. Even during life, Sviatoslav, leaving for the campaign, gave his lands to the management of 3 sons. Polhanska land with Kiev went to his eldest son Yaropolk, Drevlianskaya to Oleg, and Novgorod to Vladimir. Soon after the death of his father, a struggle broke out among the brothers. Oleg and Yaropolk perished in the struggle, and Vladimir again united under his authority all the lands of the Eastern Slavs and even expanded them at the expense of the neighbors. Vladimir annexed the Galician land to the Kiev state and went on a campaign against the Poles, who wanted to take it away. Vladimir also went to Lithuania, but his main concern was to protect the southern borders from the raids of the Pechenegs. Under him, the border with the steppe was fortified with a rampart and a palisade. Fortresses were built, and the settling of the border strip by military men began. Acceptance of Christianity. In the reign of Vladimir, Kievan Rus received from the Greeks orthodoxy, as Greek Christianity is called, unlike the Christianity of Western Europe, or Catholicism. With the Christian culture, the Eastern Slavs met during the constant trade and political relations with Byzantium and frequent trips to Constantinople. The main reason for the adoption of Christianity was that the class of feudal lords in the Dnieper region needed a religion that would support its class interests. First, high-class representatives began to take Christianity, including the vigilantes. Already at Igor among the prince's squad there were many Christians. Igor's widow Olga also adopted Christianity. Vladimir not only baptized himself, but also forced Christianity among his subjects. It happened like this. At the end of 987, an uprising flared up in the Byzantine Empire. From the north at the same time she was threatened by Danube Bulgarians. The Byzantine government turned to the Kiev prince for help. Between him and the Byzantine Empire was a union, 988, which was supposed to be cemented by the baptism of Vladimir and all the Russian people, and also the marriage of the Kiev prince with the Greek princess Anna. At that time Byzantium was ruled by 2 emperors. Princess Anna was their sister. With the participation of the Russian detachment, the uprising in Byzantium was suppressed. However, the emperors did not hurry to fulfill the condition of the marriage agreement between Vladimir and Princess Anna. Then Vla-44 besieged and took the Byzantine city of Kherson in the Crimea and secured from Byzantium the fulfillment of the treaty. Upon his return from Chersonesos, Vladimir ordered all the people of Kiev to be driven into the river, and the Greek priests christened them. Images of the gods were burned, the statue of Perun was dropped into the Dnieper. Christianity, however, spread far from immediately. Pagan beliefs, especially among the rural population, continued to exist for a long time. The adoption of Christianity was of great importance in the life of Kievan Rus. Compared with paganism, Christianity was a big step forward. It contributed to the further development and strengthening of feudal relations in Kievan Rus, and promoted the expansion of cultural ties. The establishment of a single religion accelerated the process of uniting all the Slavic tribes and strengthened the princely power. Thanks to Christianity, closer ties were established with the states of Western Europe and with Byzantium. Vladimir maintained friendly relations with the Czech Republic, Poland and Hungary. With the Greek imperial house princely feast, Sylvester's collection, he became related through a marriage with Anna. Cultural ties with enlightened Christian countries, especially with Byzantium, were strengthened. Kiev began to rebuild stone buildings, decorated with paintings and mosaics, on the site of the pagan tribe places of worship. Greek masters built a church, and next to it, a palace for Vladimir. The adoption of Christianity promoted the spread of enlightenment. Writing originated among the Slavs before the adoption of Christianity. 100 years before the baptism of Russia, the Slav missionaries Cyril and Methodius compiled the Slavic alphabet and translated Greek church books into Slavic, Bulgarian language. Vladimir paid much attention to education, ordered to select children from noble parents and gave them to study literacy. The memory of Vladimir was preserved in folk songs, or by Lana. In the epics, in the person of the glorious warriors, the Prince Vladimir's peasant Ilya Muromets, Dobryny Nikitich, Alyosha Popovich, and others, who defended the Russian land from the steppe inhabitants, the people embody their ideals of love for their homeland. The epics reflect the memory of Kievan Rus as a brilliant epoch of Russian history. Yaroslav the Wise. Vladimir died in 1015. Before the baptism, Vladimir, according to the custom of the rich Slavs, had several wives from whom he had many sons. Immediately after his death, a fierce struggle began between them. One of them, Svyatopolk, seized power in Kiev and killed his brothers, Boris, Gleb and Svyatoslav. Svyatopolk was opposed by Yaroslav Vladimirovich, who, during Vladimir's lifetime, received Novgorod from his father. With the help of the Novgorodians he defeated Svyatopolk, who fled to Poland to his father-in-law, Prince Boleslav Brave. Boleslav used these circumstances to intervene in the affairs of Kievan Rus. He invaded its borders, defeated Yaroslav in the Western Bug, entered Kiev and again put Svyatopolk on the throne. The outrages and robberies of the Poles aroused the indignation of the Russians. When the Poles dispersed to towns and villages for the winter, the population interrupted them. Boleslav with the remnants of his troops fled back to Poland. Having lost the support of the Polish prince, Svyatopolk suffered a decisive defeat from Yaroslav and Novgorod and died during the flight. Yaroslav united under his authority Kiev and Novgorod, 1019. However, his brother Mstislav Vladimirovich spoke against him. He was the ruler of the Tmutarakan Principality on the Taman Peninsula, near the Caucasus. The time and conditions for the emergence of this Russian principality have not been precisely established. Mstislav won from the Yaroslavl-Seversk land with the city of Chernigov. The border between the possessions of both brothers was the Dnieper. After the death of Mstislav, Yaroslav again annexed the Seversk land to the Kiev state. The reign of Yaroslav, 1019, 1054 was marked by the final triumph of Christianity in Kievan Rus. With him, the church administration was organized. At the head of the Kiev Church, a metropolitan was appointed by the Patriarch of Constantinople. Under Yaroslav, the Caves monastery appeared near Kiev, which played a major role in spreading education among the ruling classes of Kievan Rus. The city of Kievan, by the power and height of culture, occupied a prominent place under Yaroslavl among the states of Europe. The close political relations between Kievan Rus and Western European countries are evidenced by the marriage relations of the Yaroslav family with foreign courts. His sister was married to a Polish prince, one of the daughters was for a French king, another for a Norwegian king, and a third for a Hungarian prince. Yaroslav repeatedly interfered in the affairs of Poland. Taking advantage of the troubles that ensued in Poland after the death of Boleslav, Yaroslav again returned the cities in Galicia, which were lost after Vladimir's death. Later, Yaroslav used the troops of his son-in-law, the Polish prince. Under Yaroslav, under the command of his son Vladimir, the last expedition to Constantinople, 1043, was undertaken, which ended in failure. In Eastern Europe, Yaroslav extended his power to the Baltic nations and built the city of Yaryev, Tartu, in Estonian. On the Volga, he set the city, which he called Yaroslavl. In the south, Yaroslav had to fight intensively with the Pechenegs. He continued to strengthen the border strip by the construction of cities. In the reign of Yaroslav, the compilation of princes' judgments about the court was compiled Pravda by Yaroslav. In Pravda, Yaroslav still had vestiges of the old patrimonial orders. Thus, blood feuds were allowed. If a human being kills a man, Pravda says, then revenge on a brother for a brother, a son for a father for a son, a nephew on the part of a brother or a sister. If there is no one to take revenge, then pay 40 hryvnia for the killed. However, the obligation to take revenge was placed only on close relatives, and not on the whole family, because the family had already disbanded by that time. With the sons of Yaroslav, blood vengeance in general was abolished. Subsequently, Pravda Yaroslav was supplemented and reworked with his sons and grandsons. Culture of Kievan Rus. In the Xi century, in Kievan Rus flourished high and brilliant culture. At the heart of the ancient Russian culture of this time was folk art. After baptism, the Russians became acquainted with the science and art of Byzantium, which at that time was the most cultured state in Europe. In Kievan Rus penetrated a significant number of books from the Danube, Bulgaria. The prince himself and the rich people ordered lists from these books. Other books were retranslated into Russian. In addition to liturgical books, books and secular content were translated, in particular Greek chronicles, annals. There were also original Russian works. At the time of Yaroslav, the first attempts to compile the history of Russia. Already after the death of Yaroslav, these historical records were reprocessed in the Pechersky monastery into a vast work, in which it was narrated about where the Russian land came from. Its composition includes separate novels, biographies of princes, weather recordings of events, made in various cities, excerpts from Greek chronicles, etc. All these historical materials were arranged by years, hence the name that gives this type of work, chronicle, from the word summer year. The initial chronicle, as this work is commonly called, was constantly supplemented and refined. The initial chronicle serves as a source of our information about the ancient history of the Dnieper and neighboring lands. In the annals there is an idea of the unity of all Eastern Slavdom and of its great role in the struggle against the steppe nomads. The culture of Kievan Rus testifies to the high state of education, diversity and the richness of the then translated and original literature. The best examples of the arts of Byzantium, Transcaucasia and other countries in interrelation with folk art contributed to the formation of ancient Russian culture, which later formed the basis for the national cultures of the Russian, Ukrainian and Belarusian nationalities. Under Saint Yaroslav, the Kiev Sophia Cathedral was built. In the construction of the cathedral, which is a masterpiece of Russian architectural art of the 11th century, the usual type of Byzantine architecture was changed in accordance with the requirements of Russian architecture. Inside the cathedral, there are remarkable mosaics and frescoes. Ostromir Gospel, Manuscript G. Another monument of the Prince Yaroslav's ruins in Kiev are the ruins of the so-called Golden Gate. Foreigners were amazed at the splendor of Kiev and called it rival of Constantinople. The same luxurious buildings were built in other cities, especially Novgorod, where the son of Yaroslav Vladimir built on the model of Kiev's magnificent St. Sophia Cathedral. Chapter IV. Decrease of the Kiev state. 13. The final establishment of feudal relations in the Kiev state. Development of feudal relations in Kievan Rus. The main branch of the economy of Kievan Rus was agriculture. To the Shi century, agriculture has made great strides and spread to vast expanses. Among the Smyrds, the community members were well-to-do people. They began to seize the land and cultivate them through dependent poor people and slaves. Thus, large landowners emerged from among the community members, who concentrated large landholdings in their hands. Princes and their vigilantes also became more profitable to carry out large-scale agriculture than to limit themselves to collecting tribute from the population. The campaign against the Polovtsi, in which almost all the Russian princes took part, was crowned with brilliant success. The winners returned with a huge booty: cattle, horses, camels and captives. Even more successful campaign was made in 1111, when the Russian princes went deep into the lands of the Polovchans. The memory of the stubborn struggle that Kievan Rus had to wage against the steppe peoples for its existence was preserved in the epics in which the heroes who defended the Russian land from the Tatars are praised. By the name of the Tatars, all steppe inhabitants, Polovchans, Peknegs, etc. are generally implied. In the Bylinas it is told how Ilya Muromets, Dobrynya Nikitich, Alyosha Popovich and other heroes stand on the heroic outposts and guard the Russian land. Vladimir Monomakh. In 1113, after the death of Prince Iziaslavich of Sviato Regiment, a major uprising broke out in Kiev. The urban poor, driven to despair by oppression of princely servants and exploitation by wealthy money-lenders, rebelled and defeated their yards. The uprising was ready to spread to the village. Under threat were the big feudal lords, monasteries, boyars, the family of the deceased prince. The frightened rich Kievids sent to Vladimir Monomakh to call him to the princeling. "Come, prince, to Kiev. If you do not come, then know that much evil will be done. Go to the boyars and monasteries." The arrival of Vladimir and his retinue put an end to the uprising. Vladimir understood the need for concessions and issued a law that somewhat limited the amount of interest on the loan. The procurement situation was also slightly facilitated. But these concessions, caused by the fear of new uprisings, did not in the least alter the general situation. Vladimir Monomakh, 1113-1125, having seized Kiev, tried to delay the disintegration of the Kiev state. He compelled the other princes to obey themselves and severely dealt with the disobedient, taking away the cities from them. All the princes were at his hand and should appear to him at the first call. The powerful Kiev prince played a major role in the affairs of Europe. Vladimir was related to the Greek imperial house. His mother was the daughter of Emperor Constantine Monomakh, hence the nickname of Prince Vladimir, Monomakh. Vladimir's granddaughter was married to one of the Greek princes. Sister Vladimir Monomakh was married to the German emperor. Vladimir himself was married to the daughter of the English king. Vladimir interfered in the internecine strife that took place in Byzantium. His troops went to the Danube. As a result of several large campaigns deep into the Polovchan steppes, Vladimir Monomakh forced the Polovtsi to stop the attacks on Kievan Rus. Vladimir Monomakh was distinguished by his daring and courage. "I did not run to save my life," He wrote to himself, "I did not spare my head." Children, he told his sons, do not be afraid of either the host or the beast, do the work of men. All his life he spent in campaigns and dangerous crossings, did not give himself rest at night, nor during the day, nor in the cold, nor in the heat. He loved to hunt and risked his life more than once. Twice a tour, a wild bull took him to the horns, a deer bored, elk trampled on his feet, a wild boar tore his sword from his side, the bear bored his dress, the fierce beast leopard dumped him together with the horse. Stormy life did not interfere with the development of the intellectual interests of the princes. Vladimir's father, Vsevolod, was an educated man. He knew 5 foreign languages. Vladimir himself highly appreciated knowledge. What you know, do not forget the good, and what you do not know, you learn, he wrote to his sons. He read a lot, even with him were always books. He himself wrote an interesting instruction to the children, in which he depicts the image of an ideal prince, in his opinion, and gives many examples from his own life. The significance of the Kiev state in the history of the USSR. The Kiev state is a stage not only in the history of all Eastern Slavs, it became the historical cradle of 3 fraternal peoples, Russian, Ukrainian and Belarusian, but also non-Slavic nations, later separated into separate states. In the depths of the state of Kiev there was a high and vivid culture. It was the source of the cultural development of individual Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe and had a great influence on neighboring peoples. By their constant struggle with the steppe nomads, Kievan Rus rescued the countries of Western Europe from their devastating raids. The Kiev state was not, however, a solid political whole. Between separate parts of the Kiev state there were no close economic ties, in the absence of which it was impossible and a strong state association. As the productive forces grew in separate regions that were part of the Kiev state, agriculture was spreading, the craft grew, large land ownership was strengthened, and the economic importance of cities increased. Separate state centers arose in these regions, and the disintegration of the Kiev state became inevitable.